Today we have Brian Decker, and he's going to be talking about claims-based identity. I'm not even watching it on the screen here. Brian is here originally from Springfield, so if we ask why he moved to this place, the answer is he doesn't know any better. He's worked with government agencies doing software development as software developer and also as an architect for many, many years. And currently he's working with the Department of Transportation, and he works for CAP Strategies. So Brian's going to talk about something that has been a focus of quite a bit of effort in terms of doing claims-based identity and trying to separate it from an application. So, here's Brian.
All right. Yeah, like you said, my name is Brian Decker. I work for Capital Strategies. My information is their email address, Twitter account. Tonight I want to talk a little bit about an introduction to claims-based identity. This is going to be kind of an introduction. It's a huge topic, so there is a lot there to discuss. But what I hope you get out of this tonight is a good foundation for what claims-based identity is, how it works, how you can use ADFS, Visual Studio 2013, to take advantage of claims-based identity for your organization's applications. Agenda for tonight, I'd like to cover some concepts and terminology, a little bit about architecture. We'll go into Visual Studio 2013 and some of the features for claims-based identity that are in there. We'll talk a little bit about Active Directory Federation services, and we'll do some demos of Visual Studio 2013 and how we can connect to Active Directory Federation services and so on. Just as a side, some of the resources that I tend to go to that I think if you're interested, a couple of these are books and one of them is a white paper. There's a guide to claims-based identity and access control. It's a second edition. It's a little old, but it has a lot of good information in it. You can see the list of authors that are in there. These guys are all gentlemen that know an awful lot about this topic. So it's a very good book and still a good go-to book. There's also Programming Windows Identity Foundation and Claims-Based Identity for Windows, which is actually a white paper by David Chappell. So I use these books a lot. I've done some claims-based identity work for a couple of different state agencies, and they've been a pretty good foundation for moving forward. And as this is becoming more popular, as everything is becoming more claims-based, I think you'll see there'll be more books, more resources available, and more information will come out about it. Is anybody here familiar with claims-based identity? Have you done it, set it up, used it? Mark back there has. Alan has back there. Okay. So one of the first things we really kind of have to understand is what is identity? Identity, in simple terms, is the state of having a unique or identifying characteristics held by no other person or thing. The individual characteristics by which a person or thing is recognized. You know, your name, information about you, maybe where you live, information that identifies you. It's also a set of attributes that describe a user or some other entity in a system that you want to secure. Okay, these are all things that can represent identity that can be used later for a system to know who you are, to authenticate or authorize you for use of an application. Identity is key in claims-based identity. Now, some important concepts, base concepts we really need to understand before really moving forward is what is a claim? A claim can be a lot of things. A claim is a statement that one subject makes about itself or another subject. My name, my email address, the color of my hair. A claim could literally be anything. It's a statement about yourself or another subject. The statement can be about name, identity, key, group, privilege, or other capability. An issuer. An issuer is a trusted provider of claims about a user. ADFS is an issuer. Google, OpenID, Facebook, LiveID, they're all issuers. And what's a security token? Security token is a set of claims provided by an issuer about a user. So I have a security token, right? This token is a list of the claims that are about me. And the reason it's a security token and I can trust it is because it's provided by an issuer that I trust. I'm trusting that this person is telling me that this is Brian Decker, that this is his email address, and the information that's in that claim, that's in that security token, those claims are actually valid. So here's a basic claims pattern. Can you see the letters there very well? Those are the numbers there. They're a little small. The first one is authenticate. When I go to a web app, the basic thing is I get redirected to an issuer. The issuer authenticates me. Could be certificate, could be username and password, whatever identifying information that I give in order to be authenticated. That issuer then issues a token, a security token of information that it knows about me, populated with the claims that it possesses in its attribute stores, or information about me that it can reliably send back to me and basically say, this is the information I know about this individual. And then once I get that token, once that token comes back to my browser, I send that back to the application that I'm trying to initially get to. That application can then use the information that's in there in order to authorize me to use various features of the application, which we'll see a little bit of later. Of some more claims-based identity terminology. First off, you probably, if you're familiar with claims-based identity, if you've heard a little bit about it, a lot of times you'll hear multiple things called the same. So a relying party, simply that could be an application. An RP is an application that uses claims. Security token service, another word for an issuer. An STS is the part of an issuer that accepts requests, creates, and issues tokens. The identity provider, also an issuer. The identity provider validates credentials and issues tokens. And then we have another one down here called a Resource Security Token Service, or an RSTS, which is also an issuer. It's kind of a pass-through issuer, or an RSTS accepts tokens from another issuer, right, a provider, and translates into application-specific claims. It could be the man in the middle, so to speak. I can have an RSTS that's trusted with an identity provider, and the tokens pass through my RSTS. Maybe it adds some more claims into the token and reissues another token that can be passed to my application. A lot of terminology here, so we're going to have some more terminology. Active client, smart or a rich client. Windows Presentation Foundation, Windows Forms. Active client applications use what's called WS Trust, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. It's a specification, one of the extensions for the security. Passive client, which is what we'll be spending time on tonight, is basically a browser client. It's a simpler protocol, uses HTTP gets and posts. The passive client applications use the WS Federation protocol. Still, a little bit more terminology. I'm going to overdo it a little bit here, but these things are pretty important for us to understand when we start looking at code and some other things about going forward. The WS extensions are a suite of security standards for web requests. Whenever you're reading about identity, claims-based identity, you're going to see these things mentioned a lot. The WS security, it's a specification that defines a protocol for end-to-end message content security. It provides the ability to send security tokens and verify message integrity. It's really the base extension for all of the others. The WS Trust builds on the WS security and allows for exchange of tokens for credentials in different trust domains. And the trust domain is basically the realm that your application is, the security realm that your application is in. WS Federation, again, builds on WS security and WS Trust and defines mechanisms to allow different security realms to access resources with identities managed in other realms. It's kind of the concept behind federation. Okay, so why use claims-based identity? Say I have most of my apps are Windows-based apps. Let's say I'm using Windows Integrated Authentication. They're all internet apps. Okay? I may not need to use claims-based identity. I have a single sign-on mechanism using Kerberos and Windows Integrated that may satisfy all my needs. I can get information about the groups I belong to in the Windows token. All that information could be provided for me. Claims-based identity can support many authentication techniques, making it ideal for applications needing to support both internal and external users. So now I can remove authentication from my application, and I can support extranet, internet, intranet scenarios with one application installed in one location based on the principles of federation. And claims-based identity does support Kerberos, Windows Integrated Authentication, Forms Authentication, and like X.509 certificates, just to name a few. It supports a lot of other identity mechanisms as well. I can remove the authentication logic from individual applications. It's kind of key for me for claims-based identity without a lot of the other things that come along with it, is just to remove the authentication from the app. I don't want the app to have to worry about login screens or how do I authenticate? Do I need to make sure that the password that somebody has entered when they registered to use my app matches all the complexity requirements, that it has to expire every 30 days, that it has to do all that. I want somebody else to do that. I don't want my application to have to worry about that. I want that removed. Just think of it this way. If I have 10 different applications and I have this in each one of these applications, that's 10 different spots I have to maintain that. Sure, there's other ways to get around possibly doing that, but I know in places that I've been, I've seen applications that some of them do it this way. Some of them create their own authentication mechanism and store them in a database this way. Some of them use ASP.membership providers. Some of them use Windows Integrated with basic authentication. Some of them go through ISA server. There's a myriad of different ways that you can authenticate your app. And one of the keys I like to see is find a way to be able to remove that from your application so that all your applications can work in basically the same fashion. They don't all have to worry about authentication. All they really need to do is, this guy says you're this user, this user is authorized to use my application in this manner, and that's all I have to worry about. And another really nice feature is the nature of claims allows for more information to be provided to the applications relatively simply. Remember our discussion about a claim. A claim can be anything. You can create your own claims. They don't have to be a predefined set that some application says that you need. I've worked at agencies where, when we've done claims-based identity, I've needed specific claims for a particular application. Now, granted, that may not be ideal, because the idea of claims is you want to kind of centralize that or make it so that my claims can be shared across multiple applications. But occasionally you're going to run into the need where I have a claim that I can pass in this token to all my apps that I can populate through an issuer from an attribute store, and I can use that in my applications as a key piece, and it's with the token that actually gets passed to me. So, and there can be a lot of different information that you can use or pass to applications this way. Okay, let's talk about a claim. We talked about claims and tokens, and you have security code tokens, and security tokens basically contain a bunch of claims. So claims can represent pretty much anything about a user like we've discussed. And all a claim is, it's nothing fancy. It's a key value pair. It's a claim type and a value. Okay, that's all it is. The claim type is a string that's stored as a URI, basically. It's not a URI type, it's just represents a string that represents a URI. There are predefined ones. Some of these right here are some common ones. Those don't go to, those are just URIs, so they don't go to websites or anything like that, but that identifies a particular type. You can create your own. Give it a different URL, give it whatever URI that you want, so that the app your app can understand it. Of course, if you give it a type, the application that uses it has to understand what to do with that claim type. And so here's just some values. So this claim's name, this could be a value that's stored in it. Email address, obviously, there's my email address. And the concept of a role can also be stored administrator. Let's talk a little bit more about the anatomy of security token, because these are big concepts to understand. Tokens can contain one or more claims. Tokens contain signature information. They're digitally signed by the issuer to say, this is valid information, nobody has tampered with it. It's digitally signed. The different technologies that are used, the security search and markup language, SAML, is an XML encoded structure embedded in HTTP posts and SOAP messages. That's what ADFS typically uses. Some people might say that might be a little outdated, you know, because it's XML based, SOAP, and that whole thing is kind of, I don't know, early 2000s, kind of gone by the wayside a little bit now. There's also simple web token, SWT, which is an HTML encoded structure embedded in HTTP headers of requests or responses. And then there's also JSON web tokens, which a lot of people might be tempted to use nowadays because of all the SPA type apps, mobile apps, and so on. JSON encoded object that is digitally signed using JSON web signature, JWS, and or encrypted using JSON web encryption. Tonight we're going to mainly focus on the security search and markup language. That's ADFS uses that, can use that to pass tokens back and forth. I don't believe ADFS supports JSON web tokens right out of the box. I think you have to have another issuer kind of running as an RSTS to convert the token from ADFS into a JSON web token, something like the Dominic Bear's group's Think Texture. You know, the STS that they have, I believe, has a lot of features like that in it, that they can actually take tokens in one format and convert them to another. Excuse me. And basically, it's all about trust. This whole notion of trust. Your application has to trust the issuer. The issuer has to know about the application. Claims-based identity requires an explicit trust relationship between the issuer and the application. There has to be that trust there, that you trust this issuer, that the information he's giving you is secured and is correct. Applications can only believe claims from an issuer that is trusted. You can't just submit a claim from some issuer that's not trusted and let them into your app. You don't know that it's real or true, right? You don't know anything about that person that gave you that token. And then again, there can be cryptographic assurance that claims data received comes from a trusted source. So it's signed and it can actually be encrypted. Can you guys see that okay? Here's basically, when we talk about ASP.NET, we talk about web apps in general. Here's basically the sequence of events that happens. I got my browser up. I want to browse to a particular application. So I try to browse to that application. The application basically comes back, will tell me you're not authenticated. When that comes back, basically, when it says that I'm not authenticated, if I'm set up for claims-based identity, it will redirect me. A 302 will be sent back to the browser with the, my mouse always disappears, which will cause the browser to redirect to the issuer, where I will then type in some information, user ID, password, whatever that issuer requires. If I have a certificate, I would be passing the certificate to it. I wouldn't have to authenticate. And then the issuer will query for attributes to build the claims. The attribute store can be a lot of different things. It could be a SQL database. It could be, in the instance of ADFS, it hits Active Directory by default, but it can also hit other LDAP services, Atom, or a SQL instance of itself. And then once I have the attributes, the security tokens created by the issuer, SAML token signed, sent back to the browser. The browser then turns around and posts that signed token back to the application, which is enabled with WIF, Windows Identity Foundation, will validate that token, and then the browser will receive the page and the federated tokens, the cookies that are associated with that request. And that's basically it from the passive standpoint of what actually happens. I don't have the active one in here. The active one has a few less steps. You know, if I was doing a WPF app, maybe even a mobile app or a SPA type app, it might have a few less steps if I was doing active authentication. And once we get into Visual Studio, we'll look at this a little more. So Visual Studio and claims-based identity. have recently discovered that Visual Studio 2012 does something a little nicer than Visual Studio 2013 does. It's kind of a, how do I say, it's kind of a trade-off. Visual Studio 2012 seems to do something a little nicer than Visual Studio 2013 does, and Visual Studio 2013 seems to do a couple things a little nicer than 2012 does. But what was in 2012 is not what's in 2013, at least as far as I know right now. It's very close, but there are a couple things that I think 2012 does a little better. Basically, in 2012, there is an extension that you can download. It's called the Identity and Access Tool extension. So if you guys are using 2012 and you want to play around with claims-based identity, go download that extension if you have 2012. The nice thing about that extension is that I don't have 2012 on here, so I can't show you, is that it puts a context menu on the project that allows you to connect to a local STS. It installs a local STS for you, so you don't have to have ADFS, you don't have to have any other service provider, security token service installed on your network. You can just work locally right on your workstation. And it also can put the code in to connect to set it up to connect to ADFS or to another provider, which is kind of nice. And it allows authentication to be changed easily on existing applications. So since it's not a part of the scaffolding or the wizard that creates the project, it's just a context menu. I can go in there, right mouse click, select identity and access, and I can change where I'm pointing to and do certain things without having to go change web config files and so on. Visual Studio 2013 does stuff a little differently. So Visual Studio 2013, I like this word scaffolding. I've been hearing it a lot lately. I don't know if it's more prevalent now in 2013 or if it was in 12. I don't know. But there's new scaffolding for creating web applications. I'll show you that in just a little bit here. The authentication methodologies that you choose are selectable. Again, the Identity and Access Tool extension is not available. However, the people that created, I forget the name of it, but Think Texture, the people that created their STS, saw that the Identity Access Tool, that there was no local STS any longer, and created this NuGet package called Embedded STS, which allows you to do something very similar, albeit doesn't have the whiz-bang features of the old local STS that allowed you to create claims easily, that had a nice little screen where I could go in and add in the claims I wanted to test with and so on. This one does basically the same thing, except it's a little bit more manual. But it does work really well. And we'll take a look at that. All right, let's pop into Visual Studio 2013. See how fast that popped up? That's amazing. I love this laptop. My desktop doesn't pop that up that fast. Okay, so here's that scaffolding I was talking about. Visual Studio 2013. You notice, used to be when you clicked on the web, there used to be, I don't know, a whole bunch of different applications, different project templates that you could go into and pick from, MVC, whatever, all web forms and so on. Well, now you can kind of see those here. If I go back to Visual Studio 2012, under here I can see all of these right here, all the ones that used to be in there. Now I just have this ASP.NET web application. Have you guys seen this? Has anybody used Visual Studio 2013? Okay. So I'm going to create this web application really quick. So now I'm going to start a template, pick MVC. You can pick which core folders that you want. I can add unit tests. But here's the button I want to talk about. This is new. Before, this was the functionality that identity and access control tool kind of did after the fact, after you created the project. Well, right now it's asking you to do that before. When you create the project, it wants you to pick your authentication mechanism. It defaults to individual user accounts, which could be used for, it sets up all the OWIN stuff in Visual Studio for Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft Live accounts. So if you want your application to connect to one of those providers, it puts that all in the application for you. And basically, all you have to do is register and create your account for those, and it's all right. The scaffolding builds all that for you. That could be a big topic for another demo sometime, probably to hit on some of the OAuth stuff, OpenID, and maybe some of these things here. If you're going to connect internally to Azure or on-premise ADFS, you pick organizational accounts, and what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go through the organizational accounts, and then there's just plain Windows authentication. But for right now, the problem is if I don't have an ADFS server and I wanted to put in the information for ADFS, it won't do it. Because if I don't know what my ADFS server is, I can't get past this. The wizard won't let you pass it. You have to have a valid, point to some valid federation metadata, which is basically information about the issuer and the claims that are provided in order to be able to get past the wizard when you pick this. So for what I want to do right now is I'm just going to pick no authentication. And I'm going to click OK. Okay. The individual. If there isn't really just a form, there isn't really just a forms on there. You probably would have to add that stuff into the config manual, I believe. Anybody know the answer to that? You know that, John?
I'm pretty sure that if you pick, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure if you pick the one with all the Owen stuff, it throws in forms authentication.
Well, it puts some topics in there, but under the modules, it has a remove the forms auth module in there, and I'll show you that. So I guess I don't really know the answer to that question. Whether maybe it puts a lot of the authorization stuff in there, like deny or allow and all that stuff. But the forms auth piece, it may be done a little differently now, and maybe it's not in that config file. But I didn't delve into it a lot when I looked into this. It seemed odd when I didn't see it that there wasn't a forms auth item on that list. But so see, now I have my MVC project, and if I go look at the web config, you'll see there's really nothing in here. So there's no authentication stuff in here at all. So what I want to do is what I want to show you is I want to go, if I wanted to connect this to a starter STS, because of the wizard now, I almost need to pick no authentication, and then I can go in and go out to NuGet. We'll see how well this new LTE on my AT&T phone works. We'll go out to NuGet, and here is the embedded STS. It's pretty quick. Okay, so now when I did this, what you'll see is it will have modified the web config. It gave me a nice little README that showed me everything I'm going to have to add into the web config. And you'll notice that, let me see, where's that at? Show all. Save this. Should be right here. Live demos never go the way you think. I'm glad that opened so fast, otherwise it would be a little different. There's a file I'm looking for that's supposed to be showing up in here, and it's just not. So we'll go ahead and go on. What I'm going to do,
What are you looking for?
there's a JSON file that gets created when I, should be in here.
Right click and go open in Windows Explorer.
Yeah, see, it didn't do it. Interesting. I can show you that in the other one. Oh, I know what it is. I ran into this before, I think. I got to copy these in here first. So I'm just going to go out to the web config, and I'm going to go ahead and put in these sections. And basically, these are the things that every application connected to use claims needs. These are the sections that have to be added. Oops. These are the modules. For the session authentication module, and here's the WS Federation authentication module. And then the last thing you have to do is put this in here. I need to go. Just take this URL. Should be able to run this. So it's not finding that JSON file. All right, well, we'll go over this in the other one that I already have set up, and I can show you how that works. We'll go ahead and I'll open up this other file. We'll do that real quick. It's going to go into this one later, but we'll go ahead and go into it now. Okay, so basically here, I just turned off the one pointing to the ADFS server, and I'm pointing back to the embedded STS server. And what should happen is I know you can't really see this. Here's the STS that's right here. We can see this in Fiddler. But this is the information that's causing the redirect. This is the embedded STS user interface. It comes defaulted with two people in it, Bob or Alice. We can pick Alice and click sign in. And basically what it does is it returns a security token back to the application. See, it's still waiting to redirect. It redirects. It knows I'm Alice. I have this little app modified, so when I click on Alice, it shows me the claims that are actually associated with that identity that gets passed back to the application with what they are. Now, what I saw that was missing, which I'm not sure why it was missing, is this. I was expecting to see this. That's the file that when I added it, it didn't show up for some reason. It did it one other time when it didn't show up, but I thought I only had to... Oh, I know what it was. But see here, the embedded STS, instead of having a nice interface to do this, it's just JSON. So basically, the embedded STS, you have to specify the information. So here's where it specifies the claim type and then its value. So these are the two people that are actually in here. You can add as many as you want, put your own names, your own test data, however you want to do that. And then you can just simply use the local STS to test your app with the claims for authorization. So for instance, in here, I have Bob. I created two claims in here. Bob is a movie user and a movie admin. So I can see when I go back and look at the NBC movie screen here, he has create new. And if I go look, he has the ability to edit and delete. Okay? And we'll go into that in just a little bit. Now, let me log off. I'm going to go pick Alice. Alice only has movie user. So if I go look at movie, I notice the create new's gone, right? And then when I click on When Harry Met Sally, I don't have edit or delete because she's not allowed to do that. She's just a user of the application. I just can go back to the list. That was all done with these claims that are being passed. So I wish that other demo would have worked. We would have basically done the same thing with that though. So instead of the identity and access control, how it works now is it's a little bit more manual. You have to put in the config sections. At least it gives you that README that has that information in there for you, so that you can cut and paste it in, modify the JSON file, and you can use the embedded STS. It's not the nice GUI that used to be in 2012 where I can just go in and manually create the claims in the GUI and have it actually run. It's a little more manual. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Active Directory Federation services. Basically, it works with Active Directory. Supports the following protocols: SAML 2.0, WS Federation, and WS Trust. Can be used entirely inside an organization, exposed on the internet, or both. So basically, if I have ADFS set up to pass me back claims, I can set up the internal ADFS server to use Windows authentication, and I can set up the new one doesn't have a proxy anymore, but I can set up an external ADFS server that uses forms-based authentication. So people that are outside just type in the credentials. They get like a basic forms authentication. They get a little screen popped up. They type in their user ID and password, and they use basically the same system, same application that an internal user would use, except it hits ADFS in a different fashion. So that's how multiple different protocols can be used based on how you want to interact with the ADFS server. And the app is basically the same app. Again, it doesn't know anything about authentication. All it cares about is what claims it's passed in order to be able to authorize. Active Directory Federation Services supports SQL Server as an attribute store. I can connect to external attribute stores. It supports LDAP and custom attribute stores, although that's a little more convoluted to create. I'm not sure why you would really need to do that. You probably could do everything you needed with SQL Server and or LDAP. Here's basically what happens. Here's the basic claims pattern for ADFS. Same basic model as before, with the exception of now, first I authenticate to ADFS. Okay, it's going to go out to Active Directory and authenticate me to make sure I am who I am, and then it's going to gather data. I can set up rules to go gather data from other attribute stores, from an LDAP directory, SQL database, or just from Active Directory. The issuer is just going to issue the token. It's going to send the token back to the application, which is going to authenticate me. So it's in essence the same as the basic pattern with like the embedded STS, but it just gets it's starting to balloon out a little bit, starting to get a little bigger. I can go gather my claims from multiple different places. They don't all have to come from Active Directory. They don't all have to come from one attribute store. I have one issuer, but it can get information about me from multiple different locations and gather it all together and pass it back in the token. Have you guys heard the term federation? I mean, we've been talking about federation a little bit, but one of the real powerful things about claims-based identity is the concept of federation. I'm not going to go into it much here, actually, but the concept of federation is very powerful. It's It's when I can set up these trusts between different organizations, okay? And if I'm authenticated to my organization, if I have a trust to another one, I can use the resources at that other organization with my credentials because their issuers trust each other, okay? I don't have to set up a, now and with Windows Integrated Authentication, you have to do that. You'd have to set up a trust between two domains in order to be able to do that, right? So you don't have to do that with this, which is very powerful. People might be a little leery of doing that at first, setting up a federation trust. But I know they're starting to do this with state agencies a little bit. Office 365, you're trusting resources actually in a different security realm, right? ADFS can trust the issuer at the Office 365, your Windows Live ID, and be able to pass. So if you authenticate into the network, you can, through federation, just go right to Office 365 without having to type in your Windows Live ID in another mechanism. You just be authenticated right through because they trust each other. It works that way with the Azure Access Control System. Do the same thing with Azure and other third parties. But this is one very powerful piece, and you can see where this is a little different. Basically, here's the user. They're going to authenticate against their issuer, right? Their ADFS, which is going to in turn issue a token to them. This is me. I've logged on to the network, maybe, or I've gotten my token. I'm going to send that token because I'm trying to access this app over here. The trust specifies that I need to send this token to that issuer, who is going to in turn issue me a new token that I can then send to that relying party or that application. So basically the trust allows that issuer to send me a token that I can use then to send to that application that it trusts. And again, the application's not aware of this. It doesn't need to know anything about this. It happens behind the scenes. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it. It's all put away. All you need to know is what's my list of trusted issuers. ADFS handles that. The app only needs to know that it trusts this ADFS server right here. Okay, now what I'd like to do is I'd like to I have an instance of ADFS set up here. This is actually Windows Server 2012 R2, which has ADFS 3.0 on it. I believe Windows Server 2012 has ADFS 2.1. A couple of the differences I know, I believe that ADFS 3.0, they're starting to make it a little better. I believe it supports OAuth out of the box now, where I can connect to other providers and set up those trusts with other providers. Before, in earlier versions of ADFS, I don't believe that was possible unless you went to another STS that you had in the chain, like something from ThinkTexture that could actually do that for you. ADFS couldn't do that out of the box. So they're starting to enhance the capabilities of ADFS. Okay, so basically what we had to do here is I had to install a few different things. I've got the certificate services installed, Active Directory services installed, Federation services, and of course DNS, file storage, and IIS. One thing I will note, if you guys go into Azure and you want to set something this up to play with it and try it, when you have an Active Directory domain, and I ran into this bug and it actually gave me fits for a while where I was wondering if I was going to get this working for the demo. But what ends up happening is if you have a domain controller and ADFS3 on Windows Server 2012 R2 installed on the same machine, and you use the group managed accounts, which it's trying to use now or requires, when you restart the machine, sometimes it will work. Sometimes ADFS won't start. The service will say start pending, and it'll just sit there until you reboot the machine, log in really quickly, go to the tools under services, and disable the service to keep it from starting. Because if it starts, you're just kind of done. You can't do anything about it. So I finally ended up finding something on the internet that basically said in order to do that, you have to just use a regular domain user account. Don't use the group manage account. Since I've done that, I haven't had a problem since. So it's evidently the issue. If you're doing that, don't rip your hair out. Don't use group managed accounts unless the domain controller and the federation server are on different machines. Believe me, that was a few hours I wish I could get back. But basically, here's ADFS. I'm not going to go into a lot about ADFS because it's a huge thing in and of itself. Basically, here's a list of endpoints. Here are all of the trust endpoints and things. We're not really using many of them. I'm using this federation metadata. Here's the certificates that are issued in order to encrypt and decrypt the tokens, sign the tokens, and for secure server communications. And then here are the claims and claim types that are right out of the box supported by ADFS. So you can see there's quite a few. Common name, email address, groups, UPNs, and so on. Quite a few different ones here. So these are all things that can come out that you can, that are the claim types that are defined right out of the box, so you don't have to type them in. And here is where you set up the trust relationships. Claims provider trusts. Right now, it's default set up to Active Directory. I can set up claim provider trusts with other providers, like ThinkTexture. If I had that STS running somewhere, I can configure a trust between that and this. And if it does the OAuth stuff like I think it does, you could do other OAuth providers. And I think OpenID as well. Not sure about that. I didn't get a chance to try that. Relying party trusts. In order for your application to be able to connect to ADFS, to pull claims out of it or to authenticate against it, it has to trust. Remember we said trust is everything with claims-based identity. So you have to be able to set up a trust between your application and the actual issuer. And here's where you do that. There's a wizard that actually does it. It walks you through. We'll just kind of look at this real quick. It asks you about federation metadata. If you don't have the file, you can enter data manually. I'll give it a display name. We'll just call it test. ADFS profile. Supports relying parties that are interoperable with new ADFS features such as security token encryption and SAML2 protocol. Those other ones are older versions. You can also specify a token encryption certificate. I'm just going to go past that, but you can browse and find one and install it, and it will encrypt the tokens for you. You can enable support for the WS Federation passive protocol and also the SAML SSO, Web SSO protocol. Single sign-on service supports browser-based claim providers using Web SSO protocol. But what you would put in here is actually, the example is a little confusing because you think you would put in there something that's related to ADFS, but what you actually put in here is your app. So we'll just call it test. This is not really my app, so we're not going to do this. But pretend that's the URL of my app. Oops. Okay. And it automatically puts my relying party's trust identifier. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at that. The name of my app is the trust that I have. You can specify other things as well. I'm not going to configure multi-factor authentication. And I can say permit all users to access this relying party, or I can deny all users. And then there's just basically what it's going to do for me here. Okay, so once that's created, it pops up the claims rule. So I've created this trust. So now I need to specify, okay, when my app connects, what's it going to do? Okay, I have to be able to provide something back to it. So this is where you can specify outside of the default ones, what do I want to pass? What do I want this rule to pass back? What claims do I want it to pass back? So we'll just call it the name rule. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, oops, I'm going to click on attribute store. If I define multiple attribute stores, they'd show up here. Right now, I'm just going to pick Active Directory. We're going to go ahead and call it display name. And we'll say that is the claim it's going to pass me is name. So what it's going to do is it's going to pull the display name out of Active Directory and pass it back as a name claim in my token. I can specify any number of these. So if I want to pass back things out of Active Directory, all I have to do is list them here in the rule, and those will actually get passed back as the claims in the security token back to the application. I'll just do the one for now. We'll show you the other one I have earlier. So here's my claim. So now if I created an app called and had it running under the URL HTTP test, when it went to authenticate, it would run this. It's set up to use ADFS, and it would follow those rules and pass back those claims actually to me. So here's a sample I created for the demo. I have this app that it can actually use. I just gave it a display name. It's localhost 44302. This will work with just the local host, the IIS Express 8 or whatever. What you have to do is when you need to make sure that certificates are set up if you're going to use HTTPS. So you have to set up localhost as a trusted root certificate of authority in order not to get the errors. Otherwise, you get certificate errors every time I try to use SSL if it's not trusted. So your server needs to trust the token from ADFS. It needs to trust the certificate from ADFS. So since I had this in here, I had this root certificate of authority created on this domain. I just took that root and added it into my trusted root certificates of authority on my local workstation. And then I also added localhost so I wouldn't get any certificate errors saying that it didn't know what it was. So basically that's it. Here's the endpoints that I defined. No proxy endpoints right now, no it's advanced. Okay, so if I go look at the claim rules for here, I name one called name, email, and role. So if I go look at that rule, it comes from Active Directory. Display name is name. My email address comes across as a claim email address. And I have this token group's unqualified names come back as role claims. You can do qualified names and a few other items. So down here you can see token groups as SIDs, qualified domain names, and there's a few others. I'm going to cancel out of that real quick. So that's where those. And I also have there's an anti-forgery tokens that are actually included as a part of most of the scaffolding in these now. And what it is, it's looking for, and I'll show you this in the demo. It's looking for a specific claim. If that specific claim, not the value, just the claim, is not in the security token, it triggers the anti-forgery errors, which won't let you into the application because it thinks somebody's spoofing a security token. So you can tell it what claim you want to look for. It looks for two of them out of the box. One of the ones it looks for is not by default in Active Directory, but you can change in your application and tell it which claim do you want to use as a claim identifier for the anti-forgery token, and it will then just look for that one claim. So I created a rule for anti-forgery token. So what it'll do is it'll then in turn it'll run both of these rules when I try and log in. And here's where I can define other attribute stores. LDAP and SQL are the ones that are here right out of the box. And you can also do a custom one, but that's a lot more convoluted. And then here are the authentication policies. This is very important. You can set the primary authentication globally or in custom settings. For the demo, what I did was, this is what I talked about earlier, when you can set, I have any extranet scenarios using forms authentication. They can also use certificate. Any intranet scenarios I have using forms authentication, Windows authentication, or certificate authentication. I have it also using forms. If I were to select Windows and run my demo, what it would do is pop up the basic auth window for me to type in my domain credentials. I didn't want that. I want the form to pop up. So for the demo's purposes, I told it to just use forms authentication. If I was in the same domain and I used Windows auth and those domain that ADFS was in was trusted, then Windows auth wouldn't even ask me to log in, right? It would just go ahead, go to ADFS, grab my set of claims and pass them right in. I wouldn't get prompted at all. But since my domain is not trusted by this laptop, I went ahead and did forms authentication because I didn't want the other one to pop up. So that's where you set this. You can also set these settings based on relying party. So I just did them globally. So that's a real quick ADFS setup tutorial there, very fast. Does a lot more than that, does more than I can go over in the time allotted. So what I want to do is I'm going to go in, and here's the thing I was telling you about earlier when you asked about forms auth. This is almost always in there. Remove the forms authentication module. The scaffolding puts us in there in most places, so I'm not sure about that forms auth question. When I go and pick organizational, what it does is, you know how with the embedded STS one, I had to cut and paste all the config sections and the modules and all that stuff in. If I clicked organizational in the scaffolding and put in the name of the ADFS server and so on, it will actually put all this stuff in the web config for me. And that's actually how I created this. I had to go ahead and put it all in there. So, and you know what? That's why it didn't go. When I did that embedded STS, I didn't have this authentication mode equal none, so it didn't know it had to authenticate. And I didn't have the deny in there, so that's why I went right to the app. That's the step I missed when I put that in there. So this will force it to actually deny everybody anonymous access. Excuse me. So some of the things that it puts in here, this is your audience URI. This gets passed to the ADFS server. So if you don't have this in here, it won't trust you, and you'll get an error message back saying this app is not trusted by this issuer, and it won't authenticate you. You'll just get a hard error right there. The security token handlers. You also specify a trust to the security token service ADFS with the thumbprint and the fact that it's a valid issuer. Likewise, the application has to trust the issuer. So if the application doesn't trust the issuer, it again won't, even if it knows the URL to redirect you, it won't allow you in because the app doesn't trust it. And then down here a little further, here's the item that I had remarked out earlier. So we're going to remark that out. And we are going to unremark that. So you can see here, I've got passive redirect enabled. And the passive redirect is nice for web applications because I don't have to do anything in the code at all. All I have to do is modify the web config, and it'll automatically redirect me. The federation modules that are loaded take care of all that for me. You absolutely have to change no code in order to connect this to ADFS. So you'll see that when I ran this against the embedded STS, all I did was unremark this one piece of code and remark in order to connect to the STS, in order to connect to my ADFS server. All I'm doing is telling it to go to here now. Very simple. Let's see if it works. Okay, this is ADFS, right? It did a 302, redirected me to ADFS, which is popping up this forms auth. You can customize these. I'm going to go ahead and log in. Oops. It pulled my name, so I'm going to go look at the claims that are associated with me. So you'll notice my auth token, I had it pull the name identifier in. Here's the one's claims, email address. Here's the groups that I'm in actually. I'm in domain users. I created two groups for me, one for movie user and one for movie admin. And then these are the two authentication. These are always put in there by default. So these are the claims that I have associated with me. So again, I can go to the movie. Since I have that, I can see this and the edit, delete buttons. Now I'm going to log off. And then I'm going to come in here. Active Directory users and computers. Here I am. Go ahead and remove movie admin. Yes. Remove me from the group. Go ahead and log in again. You can see that claim is now gone. All I did was remove myself from membership in that group in Active Directory. That role is now gone. And when I come back to here, the create new's gone, edit release. So that's how you can control based on roles. The key there, and let me show you this, is this claim type right here. You know how you're used to doing authorization, if you've done much authorization type stuff in .NET, where you put the attribute on like an action or user.isInRole. Well, behind the scenes, if I have a role claim, right, .NET Framework takes care of that. So that role claim, when I do isInRole, I can just check that role, and that goes and looks to see if I have any claims in my token that are associated that have that in it. So you literally, if you already even have the authorization code all over your app that looks for things in specific roles, you don't even really have to change your application. All you have to do is pass back role claims that have those in them, and now I'm using claims-based authorization. All I have to do is really change the web config, because I've removed all the authentication out of the application. The log off, that's a little flashes a little bit. I'm not sure why that does that. Usually you don't see log offs like that. So here's what I did. Authorize users, roles. It's my movie user group. I know that's a string. In the real world, you would probably use an enumeration. You wouldn't use a string. And this is just a quick and dirty demo. So I just have a string in there. I can list multiple roles and so on. The one thing that you need to be aware of that this does that I don't really care for, I know it's by design, if I don't have authorization, it redirects you to the login page. So it doesn't tell you why. So, and what I've done in some places is I've just created another attribute that will redirect you to, I know we did it in one place where it just redirects you to an error page or an access denied page. If I were to happen to hit that MVC action, it could redirect you to an access denied, but kind of like SharePoint does when you go into SharePoint.
Usually what you would do is, I was going to say, isn't the kind of the standard approach, just let it go back to the login page, and then in the login page, if it detects if you're already logged in, then it sends you an access denied. Isn't that kind of just the easiest way to do that?
You could, but I don't have a login page.
Right.
So I mean, you can do that, but it's going to redirect you right to like account. It's going to redirect you right to that login page. So you would have to handle it in the login page.
Right. True.
So it just kind of depends on how you want to handle it. I mean, it's if you don't have code in the login page to handle that, you try to go someplace and just redirects you to the login page. It can be a little confusing. So you'd have to put code in there in order to deal with it, or redirect to just an error page of some kind. So there's that. And I have some of these down here for movie admin. So basically, it's the same authorized logic that you're used to using in your applications. There's nothing different about it. One thing I did do, I have an account controller. That's where I just throw in the claims identities into a view bag. That's why when I click on the name, you can see all the claims. That's all that does. Throw that identity logic into the view bag, and it throws out all those claims. I have some log off logic in here. Normally with passive, you may not do this. There's not always a need for a log off button, right? But what you have to do is you use the Federation Authenticate module, do a sign out, federated sign out. If you had forms authentication actually in this app, you do a forms auth sign out, then do the Federation sign out, and then send a message to the issuer that you signed out, and then redirect. Likewise with login, right? I just have this if request.is authenticated, just return me home. If I'm authenticated, I don't want to see the screen, just go home if somebody clicks the login button. Otherwise, if I'm not logged in, I have to go do the sign in behind the scenes. So passive is kind of geared towards not having to do that, but if you're doing active authentication, this is something similar to do, or if I had a screen that actually had a login button, and I didn't want to automatically redirect, I'd have to put this code in here in order to actually send the sign-in request to the issuer. And then this just redirects to where the sign-in request told it. So that's why I have the log off button there. Let me see. And in the views, again in here, probably not the best way to do it, but down in Dirty Demo, it should just be user.isEnroll. Just checking and just hiding the links if I don't have that access in the view. I'm not a big fan of actually being able to click on something and then turn around and say, you don't have access to do that. I'd rather not see the thing to click on it in the first place if I don't have it there, but some people don't like to do it that way. And then again, if I want to switch this back to the other issuer, all I have to do, if I'm testing, go back to the embedded STS. And now instead of going to Active Directory, I go to this screen right here. Sign in as Alice. No change in the application. One other thing I wanted to show you is here's that anti-forgery config. Let me show you what actually happens here. We'll blow it up. Remark that out so it'll take the default action. Oh, this won't pass. I don't ever have any error handling, so we're going to get the ugly stack trace. So I changed that one line. We're going back to, can't spell my name. Oh, prove me wrong what I did. Watch this. Forgot I had that remarked out. Now the real trick is when I put that thing back in there if it works, because I didn't test that. Okay, so see, here's the exception. It's looking for the token is actually looking for the claim type of identity provider or name identifier. Active Directory by default has the name identifier one I can add, but it doesn't have the identity provider one. You could add that in custom and pass that back if you wanted to use the default anti-forgery, or you can actually go in. Yeah, there's the error. So there's the error's a little better. Or we should be able to go in. I'm going to say should because I didn't test this. We should be able to go in the global ASAX, and I'm simply setting my unique claim type identifier to the name identifier, which I'm passing back from Active Directory, and should let me through. So you can change the anti-forgery token how you want to tell it which claim types you want to actually look for in order to run that validity check if your provider doesn't provide the ones that are out of the box by default. So, and I'm actually providing that right here. Does anybody have any questions?
Very good.